Hi, everybody. We're back to talk about another Batman movie. This time, hopefully, well, not even hopefully, definitely more positive. We're talking about Batman Begins, what you could argue was like a progenitor to the current comic book movie era that we're in right now. The real start of Batman's still ongoing, like massive popularity is like this darker, more grounded property. And yeah, it's what a lot of people got into Christopher Nolan with. It's it's just a great movie, but also one that I have not watched a lot, surprisingly. I want to say it was only my third or fourth time watching it in preparation for this commentary, and for the first time in a long while. But yeah, I'm excited to get into this one. So that said, we both have our copies of the movie at timestamp 0. If you have a copy of the movie and you want to watch along with us, you can just listen to it. You can just listen to us on our own. But if you want to watch along, then get your own copy of the movie to 0. And when I give the word, we're going to start. So let's get going in three, two, one, now.
So I did not see this movie in the theater. I don't even remember seeing any preview for this movie as a kid. But I want to say it was Fox, not Fox, FX. FX did reruns of this movie constantly, and I watched it not religiously, but whenever this was on, I would watch it. Um, this is hands down my favorite superhero origin film. Um, I think it's a really strong case for the origin movie. Um, and it's not the story is so strong that I'm not just tapping my foot waiting for Bruce Wayne to finally put on the suit. I'm
Three.
invested in the story from the very beginning. I think the nonlinear structure really helps, and I overall like this movie is absolutely stellar. Um, there's only two real criticisms, like strong criticisms that I have. The first being, I don't think the action in this movie, at least like the physical, like hand-to-hand combat, is like shot very well at all. And my other issue is Bruce's the playboy persona that he puts on should have more consequences in the next movie than it does. And I guess
Yeah,
we can talk more about that when we get to Dark Knight. But as far as this movie goes, I like overall I love this movie. Like I don't want anyone to get that twisted. Like I have two gripes really, but for the most part, like I absolutely adore this movie. I think Christian Bale is spectacular in this role. Um, Christopher Nolan's a wonderful filmmaker, and another really strong aspect of this movie is the score. I think
yep.
score and music in general and sound is a very like important part of any film, especially when you want to have the audience feeling certain emotions. And the score in this movie by Hans Zimmer is just masterful.
Yeah, when I was watching this movie last night, Brianna came in when I was about like a third of the way through, and she was just like, "Who did the score for this? It's great." And I was like, "That's Hans Zimmer, baby. That's the power that man has."
And this is a very interesting take because we don't like even for a lot of what little I've read of, well, not little because I've read a fairly substantial amount, but for the Batman comics, they don't really delve that much into Bruce Wayne becoming Batman, like developing the martial arts and like watching him travel across the country to learn all these different fighting techniques and like really get into
Yeah.
the mind of the criminal psyche. We really just kind of skip over all that time and just go straight to him coming back to Gotham and putting on the suit. And it was really interesting for this movie to chart really like these are uncharted waters. Like no one's really done this to flesh out this time from between his parents' death to becoming Batman. and that's what I think makes this as an origin story so strong.
Agreed. And like I have very little in the way of complaints about this movie. In part, that is why we picked it because after ragging on Batman v Superman so long, we just wanted to do something positive. I share your issues with the hand-to-hand fighting, but it's such a little part of this movie. There's honestly not all that much in the way of actual fighting for the bulk of it that I can't even be bothered by that too much. And like I think it speaks
This
to this movie that no one has a problem with that. Like I've never heard anyone talking about this movie be like, "Oh, there should be more action in it," because the story is just that compelling.
And I'm not even saying there needs to be more action. I'm just saying what little hand-to-hand fighting there is in this movie is not shot very well. There's a
Yeah,
lot of quick cutting. We're often too close, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
this is this is the like why am I blanking on his name? I know his name. This actor here,
Liam Neeson?
yeah, Liam Neeson. This is my favorite I've ever seen him in anything, and he's a great actor. He's kind of another one of those classic action star actors that gives a lot of gravitas here. Like this is one of his most subdued, poignant, interesting roles and performances.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of Liam Neeson's filmography you've seen, and
Uh,
he doesn't really like he is another. I'm not saying in terms of his acting, but he is another one of those classic like Bruce Willis type actors where you'll see him in a lot of B action movies or even C
yeah.
action movies.
I was gonna say he's one of those guys who's at that point in his career now where he'll show up in things that aren't great and are kind of like beneath his talents.
But I've never loved him more than I love him here. That's not to say he's gotten bad, but this is my favorite performance from him.
Yeah,
So how
honestly,
did you
I've never thought much about it, but yeah, this is up there.
so how were you feeling as a Batman fan in general pre this movie? Like, were you a huge fan of the character before this film came out? What was your experience with the cartoons, that kind of thing,
Uh, well,
and of course the previous movies.
I hadn't seen this in theaters, and I was at that stage where Batman wasn't really a big deal to me until I see The Dark Knight. So I see The Dark Knight before I see this movie, and so like I'm already used to this take on the character. So like I'm not coming into this movie with any sort of different definitive take in my mind. I'd always been a fan of the 90s animated and the universe that sprung from that. But yeah, no, like I'm a fan of The Dark Knight before I even see Batman Begins. So I don't have that thing of like someone who has a preconceived notion of Batman that they're really attached to and has to sort of like reorient themselves coming into this movie.
I was more or less not quite apathetic, but I did casually watch all the previous Batman movies, like the Schumacher movies. Um, I liked the aesthetic and the style of '89, um, but I didn't really like. I was never like in love with that movie or even any particular character in it. Um, and I liked the animated show for sure, but I wasn't like a die-hard fan. Um, and I think this movie is what turns me into a die-hard Batman fan. And I remember watching the uh, the Adam West show with my aunt back in the day when I was even younger, and like I didn't. It was interesting to me that a character like Batman could be interpreted in so many different ways. Where like you can have your silly version, you can have this much more grounded, gritty version, and kind of everything in between. And an interesting thing, like this is both a double-edged sword. Um, like the wanting to make everything gritty, I don't think really comes from this movie because weirdly, this was a sleeper hit. Like most people didn't even know this movie existed before Dark Knight came out, and uh, like this was not like this as an iteration of the character. I don't think was as beloved as we generally think of it until Dark Knight. So it's like this movie didn't really set the precedent for dark and gritty. Like we need to make everything that, particularly in comic book related content, until Dark Knight. Um, so obviously, we got stuff like Arrow because of these Nolan movies. But with this first one, it was such a such an like kind of underrated and overlooked movie that it didn't have that big massive cultural impact that we generally think of these movies on the whole as having.
Yeah, no. And I feel like it's not even these movies. I think it is specifically The Dark Knight, where, for better or worse, this movie and Rises exist in that movie's shadow. And it's probably good. I feel like it's for the best that this movie didn't end up having the Dark Knight sort of reputation and influence, because I think it's this movie being a bit of a smaller hit that allows the Dark Knight to surprise people and come out to all the excitement that it does. Whereas Dark Knight getting that reputation kind of made things more difficult for Rises, because now there's all this expectation.
Well, that and the fact that Heath Ledger died, um,
Yes.
before that movie even came out, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm. And it's interesting
I
because there
really, I
are,
really like the option that we have here.
yes, this is a lot of people's definitive Alfred, and for me, it's the '90s animated and this are like the two ones that my brain goes to. And like we do a really good job of characterizing Thomas Wayne as a really charming, like really altruistic guy in comparatively little screen time.
And I think that's really important because the the tragic backstory is a kind of classic superhero trope. Both Batman, uh, Spider-Man, Daredevil, like a lot of heroes have that. So I mean, if you want people to really invest, you got to take as much time as possible to flesh those characters out before we lose them.
Hmm. And like I'm gonna try not to, because like we just mentioned, I'm gonna try not to make any sort of like comparisons to BVS, but there is the thing that we mentioned in that movie, which is we only get a small glimpse of the Waynes in that film right before they're killed, and the little characterization that we get of them in that couple of seconds, honestly, kind of it doesn't necessarily paint a bad picture of them, but this movie is really careful to show that a guy like Bruce Wayne would need that kind of influence to become a really altruistic and like hopeful Batman. Whereas in that movie, you can extrapolate a couple of things just based on the little bit of the Waynes that we get that's not quite the same.
Yeah, we see the Thomas Wayne in that film explicitly try to get the gun out of his hands before he fires.
Like he tries to throw a punch at him, is what he does. And
Oh
then,
yeah, yeah. Generally, he tries to go on the offensive.
yeah. And that is a very offensive Bruce Wayne. Whereas this one, like, this is definitely the guy that this father would raise.
And Bruce's compassion does very much come from his parents.
Hmm. And as has been noted, like, obviously, this movie is very preoccupied with the idea of fear and so it's Bruce's own fear of the bats that like sets all of this in motion in the first place. And I like that none of this is like this. What's about to happen with Joe Chill is coincidence, but it's not contrived, and it doesn't feel like forced just for the sake of, oh, we need them to die so that we can have Batman happen. Like people like Joe Chill are out on the streets in the first place. We'll later find out because of stuff that the League of Shadows is responsible for. And so it is still, even now, decisions made by our main characters that are creating these circumstances. So on the one hand, it's like Ra's unintentionally created this consequence of like trying to destroy Gotham through economics, and Bruce's own like fear of the bats that leads everything here. And so it's really nice that all of these story beats can come from characters making decisions and not just we needed this to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really character-driven movie from top to bottom. And we have a great Jim Gordon here.
Yes. Gary Oldman is like great in almost anything, and just I always I love him in this. He's just so great. And like I like that he's competent and like really hopeful, but he's also kind of a dork. Like I think a lot of that is just in Oldman's performance where he has this really charming like dorky dad quality about him. Like we're immediately establishing that he's not exactly the norm amongst the police force because he's the only one who takes any time out to like try and comfort the kid, and everyone else is off doing their own thing.
And as much as I don't like Rises, I like that we call back to that moment.
That's great.
I think the love interest here is interesting because we we do and we don't have a love interest here, right? Like there's that moment where they kind of have like this kiss goodbye at the end of the film. Um, but Bruce longs for that relationship he wish he was like available to have. But he
Mm-hmm.
chooses his mission over that, and he also struggles with just allowing her to see the real him because he's constantly putting up the playboy persona, and it obviously doesn't paint him in the best light.
Yeah, it's an approach to love interests that I actually really like, and you see it done a couple of times. Like my mind goes to something like Doctor Strange, where it's like clearly they're these two people who have affection for each other, and in the right circumstances, they would both want that relationship, but it's just not in the cards. And so they're not really like they're romantic interests without the possibility of being a couple ever actually being on the table.
This is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie.
Did this whole training montage?
Yeah.
I love the like it immediately makes you kind of uncomfortable the fact that you can hear like the ice cracking. And it's like, haha, I would not be comfortable with this.
And Christian Bale did some insane physical work for this. Like he got too big, and then he had to trim back down, and then rebuild muscle, and it was absolutely insane. Like the stuff this dude puts his body through. I don't
This is
remember
what
what role it was, but I want to say there was a role either before this or after this where he just let him anemically skinny. Like it
mm-hmm.
was mortifying. It looked like he was held in a prison and wasn't fed for like weeks on end.
Yeah, I forget what the title is, but I know what you're talking about. I believe it is before this. And just this is why I could never get into one of these movies because like I would have to be a supporting character or something. I could not do that to my body. I do not have the will to do that.
And then to build up muscle the way he did for this part.
Yeah. And I like all of
Ra's al
this.
Ghul's motivations here are really interesting. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I like all of this, like with the fact that he will take the stuff that Roz has like on his gauntlets and add it to the Batman armor. It's stuff that used to or like we usually think of as just aesthetic, and they show it being kind of practical.
Yeah, I really like that. A much more, at least before this movie, a much more niche Batman villain that a lot of people hadn't, thought of before. Like he trains Batman and inspires a major aspect of his suit.
Hmm. He really inspires like
Like
his
that's
whole methodology.
yeah. And like there's a great line towards the end of the movie. It's like, you took my advice about theatricality a bit literally, didn't you?
Yeah,
He's like, I definitely wasn't picturing you dressing up.
like a bat. Yes, and I find that thing interesting where it's like you sacrificed your footing for a killing stroke. And it's like we will get to obviously he wants Bruce to be able to make those decisions and be able to like sacrifice quote unquote who he believes is necessary, but he's also smart about it, and he's like, don't go in for the kill if it's not to your advantage.
Yeah, Mind Your Surroundings is another really good setup and an eventual payoff in this movie.
And like we're already
And
past it with that bit where he's like you gotta be able to hide in the shadows. Is like how, and he just does that little call and the two guys just drop down.
what about that?
I really like it. It always catches me off guard.
I really like that we have a very, very imperfect Bruce Wayne. Um,
Mhm. And
it,
you
it
could
was
argue he's that way throughout the movie, like up to the end.
well, that's true, but the fact that we had all have a Bruce Wayne that tried to kill his parents' killer and
Mm,
somebody just beat him to it and he gets lucky, I really, really like that.
yeah.
It's his whole no kill thing. It's in a lot of Batman stuff. It's interesting because it's played as, I just, if I allow myself to do that, then I'm afraid of what I'll become, and that will be the thing that causes me to become just as bad as the criminals I'm fighting.
Yeah. I'm like he doesn't again, he does like you're right with him being as imperfect as he is, he doesn't start from that place. And it's sort of like the words of Rachel, among others, who's like, what it's something that she brings up, and it's something that Alfred sort of speaks to later in the movie, where it's like if you make it personal, then it's not justice, it's just revenge. And so you can kind of read into that like if he kills someone like that need that you would have to be able to do that, that's making it too personal, you're not being impartial enough, that's not justice. And that again will be something that Raz kind of speaks to toward the end, where I'll bring that up when we get to it. But he, I think, is more interested in vengeance than he is aware of.
I would have liked if Katie Holmes could have come back for the second movie. I don't
Yeah,
remember exactly why they had to recast her.
I was just about to ask how you felt about her. I really don't mind her. She's one of the things that you hear people complain about a bit with this movie, but I think she's fine.
Yeah, I think she's really good here, and I would have liked to have seen her come back. I wasn't again, I don't know exactly why they had to recast her. Um, but I mean, I definitely like quite the opposite. I think she's really good for what she's not even in this movie a ton. But she's really good with what little she has.
I think there were some people who complained that she kind of projected a bit too young and naive, and I don't really get that.
I don't either, especially with the whole talk she has with Bruce right after this scene. Like
Yeah,
she kind of checks Bruce because
yeah,
Bruce is understandably very tunnel visioned. Um, this guy wronged my parents, and he deserves to suffer and die for that.
mm-hmm,
Um, and he you know talks about justice and revenge and this guy is like they're the exact same thing because conveniently that puts what he wants in alignment with what's actually right. And she checks that. It's like that's what you're concerned with. Like it's not the greater good. Like it's not what justice is. And don't pretend like justice is what you really want when all you want is revenge.
yeah. Because
A
like
couple
Chill,
seconds. I
a
was just
couple of
about to say
seconds,
a couple seconds, and he he would have had it. He would have
yep.
killed his parents there.
And it's like his defense attorney wasn't wrong when he's like the sort of disenfranchisement and all of this stuff that's happening in Gotham like forces people like Chill into desperation. There's lines later from Falcone that makes it seem like even that aside, Chill was just kind of not a good person. But he's not wrong that there's a more systematic problem, and that's really what Rachel forces him to see. It's like, okay, if you got your revenge on the guy, not only is that just motivated by yourself, it's also not justice because there's tons more like him in his shoes created by all of this corruption. And like, if you'd killed him, then you would have conveniently had to not pay attention to any of it. Like, I just love how she has no time for his nonsense and like no patience with this ideas that these ideas that he has.
Yeah, and it's because he's had nothing but time to stew away from Gotham in his personal trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did we oh wait, we're about to get it. I love it. I've heard people make fun of this, but I think it's one of the funniest bits in the whole movie. It's not supposed to be funny, like it's a serious moment, like she's checking Bruce, putting him in his place. But when he reveals the gun here, he's like, "Yeah, I'm not one of your good people. I had every intention of killing that man today,
And she slaps him twice.
twice."
And like you can tell how affected he gets when she's like, this is not what your dad would want. This is not the kind of person that your dad would want you to be. That hits him harder than the slap, too, honestly.
Yeah, I didn't catch the last 30 seconds because my mom called. I stepped out to answer.
And I was just talking about how when she's like, this isn't what your father would want, or this isn't the kind of person your dad would want you to be. that obviously like hits him even harder than the slaps to the face do.
Yeah, your father would be ashamed of you. That's what she says. You know, it's interesting because I literally just went back and replayed the first Batman Telltale game, and it's really interesting because I think that game plays on a lot of the normalities we associate with the Batman mythos coming out of these films. And you know, Batman's father. I know you haven't played those games, but Batman's father in those games is a criminal and worked with Falcone, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
this whole big revelation that like completely turns Bruce's ideology upside down.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to challenge it like that. It's one of those things where I feel like as a result of this movie or this franchise, we do get a little bit more caught up in origin than we used to with Batman, or a lot more exploring his parents before they died. Whereas prior to this, I believe they'd be just more sort of plot devices. And on the one hand, you could argue it takes away a little bit from the actual Batmaning to spend all that time on that. But on the other side, it's really interesting all the different ways that you can experiment with that setup and like explore. Okay, what kind of people were the Waynes really? And for as much as we'd want them to be altruistic and stuff, they are still among the class that's benefiting from this very broken system that Gotham has, and what can we do with that?
Yeah, and the system is it's set up to give power and wealth to the people who already have it.
Mm.
That was a really great menacing like back and forth with Bruce and Carmine Falcone. I really like that actor.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that these movies kind of have the reputation for, again with the dark and gritty thing. Um, it's weird because a lot of people treat these movies like as as serious as they are. They don't have any humor or levity. That's
No,
just not true.
yeah, no, I was
Like,
gonna say this movie has a lot of really charming, like funny moments.
but yeah, no, unless it's Joker, a lot of that will not ever be mentioned when discussing these movies.
Yeah, no, and it's so strange to me. Like I don't know what it is that like creates that perception in people. Is it just the general vibe of it? Because I can like name 4 or 5 moments off the top of my head in this movie that's just it gets a real neat chuckle out of me. And like especially when we'll have a couple of them like stacked on top of each other. It's like when people call these movies like dry and humorless, I don't know what they're talking about.
I don't either. I mean, Rises definitely has the least amount of levity.
Yeah, do you think it's all just projecting backwards from Rises?
Maybe. But again, I don't see how that I don't think it can really be that because when people talk about the Nolan trilogy, even as a trilogy, they're mostly talking about Dark Knight, right? That's the big popular one that everybody loves,
Yeah.
and that's the one people often find themselves talking about the most. So I don't know. It's just even in that movie, apparently people just overlook all the bits of levity that don't have anything to do with Joker.
Man, it's really weird. Which I mean, to be fair, for as much levity as that movie has, it also gets heavier and darker than this one.
That is also very true. This is another really strong scene.
Yeah, I love this whole setup that they have where like when they get into the fighting, he comes in, makes a quick move, and then like once that move doesn't work, he just blends back into the crowd. It's like it's such a clever, like it keeps you as like on your toes as Bruce is. It's really great. Like the way that he eventually manages to get through it is really clever.
Yeah, really, really smart. Um, it's interesting because we don't really, because he's essentially a ninja, right? This Batman's a ninja.
Hmm.
Um, we we don't really play up the detective aspect until we get to Dark Knight. Um, and in a lot of the comics, he just kind of goes around the world and learns martial arts, but he's not really embedded in the culture of being a ninja like he is here.
Yeah, and like I think all of that is again to the movie's preoccupation with fear, which is like the detective angle is definitely a definitive part of the character, but for the purposes of this story, that's really emphasizing the degree to which Bruce is like consciously, I am going to become a thing that will create fear in people. And like the ninja tactics are such a big part of that.
Yeah, that's very true. Blending in with your surroundings and learning how to be invisible, becoming
Mhm.
more than just a man. Like
Yeah,
we tackle the theme of fear so well throughout this movie. Um, and the twist of Liam Neeson actually being the real Ra's al Ghul so well, so cleverly handled. Um, they even went as far as making sure the toys pre-release of the movie all looked like the Asian guy here for
yeah,
Ra's al
Ken
Ghul.
Watanabe. And like he's in this just enough that you would believe that he was Ra's al Ghul if you were familiar with that character. To where like there's a very fine line of him not being a big enough screen presence that, or like screen time presence, that someone would immediately get sort of iffy as to like, oh really? We brought Ra's al Ghul in just for that little itty bitty amount of screen time. But I don't know, for the little bit that he's here, he's obviously Ken Watanabe is a great actor, and he's a strong enough presence that it's like, no, that makes sense. That's Ra's al Ghul.
And you have Liam Neeson essentially pretending to be his right-hand man and translating everything that he says. So it's um like they do just enough to make you buy into it.
Hmm. And like the way that they play this whole thing of quote like the actual Raz, he's really, you get the sense like genuinely kind of disappointed that Bruce is like not taking to this path the way that he hoped he would.
Yeah. He's genuinely a disappointed mentor. And I think that's such a fascinating dynamic for a hero and a villain.
Hmm.
And of course, like his test here is is really interesting. Like we all know that at least traditional Bruce Wayne is not going to cross the line. Um, so you know that going into this movie, you're just wondering how the heck he's going to get out of this.
Yeah. And like I like just how much time we spend like talking about it. Like none of this feels rushed, which is a trap that this easily could have fallen into again because like you say, we all assume that Batman's not going to kill anybody. We all know that that's just kind of like an innate part of the character. So a movie could be justified in just having him say no and not deliberating on it so much.
But I think it is really important in just, you know, not just assuming you know the comic book history and really giving just even the most casual and general audience member a sense of why this character is the way he is.
Yeah.
That's really important for these movies. Obviously, we can't hear the score here, but the score here is pretty strong. It's strong all the way through the movie, but like,
Yeah.
and this is, I mean, it's pretty simple and it doesn't last that long. But I think as far as genuine, fist fighting goes, that's probably one of the better scenes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a sucker for a sword fight anyway, so oof. Big oof.
Um, it really kind of blows my mind that so when Ra's al Ghul comes back towards the end of the film, he's like, "You burn my house and left me for dead. Consider us even." No, dude, he saved your life and
Yeah.
brought you back. Like he goes through hell here saving you.
And that's the line that I think is like Raz really doesn't entirely even know what his own deal is because he's sort of like Bruce toward the beginning where he really thinks that what he's after is kind of like an objective impartial justice, but clearly he's not impartial. He does have that instinct for revenge in him and pretty petty revenge, honestly.
But see, that's the thing. I think he's totally steadfast in his commitment to his cause and his goal. And I don't think like he was gonna do the thing with Gotham regardless of whether Bruce joined or not. It just would have been a lot easier with Bruce joining and on his side. But yeah, I don't think his whole situation with the gas and poisoning Gotham is inherently personal. Because that was always the plan.
Yeah,
Um,
no, but him leaving Bruce and like burning his house definitely is.
yeah, that absolutely is. I have rewatched this movie like countless times. Um, but it just it remains. This isn't a movie that I've ever really gotten tired of, and that's so impressive because like we can clock it when we get to it, but I want to say we don't get our full like suited up Batman scene until like the midpoint.
Yeah, I kept
And again,
track of it.
I'm never tapping my foot waiting to get to that point because I'm invested.
Yeah, no, I think I got it last night because this movie's 220 including credits. I want to say he shows up on screen in costume around an hour and 3 minutes.
And that's such a bold and strong choice for any superhero movie.
Yeah.
It really shows where your head is in terms of story.
And
Like
like you're
we're
right,
not
it doesn't feel like we're just wasting time until we get there. It feels like it happens when it needs to happen.
yeah. It's much more ballsy than something like Deadpool because even Deadpool, even though that's also a nonlinear superhero origin movie, we very quickly front load with action. So that like we're basically telling the audience, please don't be bored. We're going to, show you who this character is, but here's him, killing people first.
I
Crane is
like.
kind of wonderfully creepy even before he puts that mask on.
Yeah, it's like he's Killian Murphy, so he should be like really charming, but the way that he's playing it, he's just like, I don't want to be in a room with you.
This poor guy. Um, I think I remember seeing this movie for the first time when he gets shot by the corrupt cops later and just being absolutely traumatized and dumbfounded. He just gets shot from the back and doesn't even like see his own death coming. You remember that?
I remember that that happened. I forgot for a moment that it was him.
Yeah, because he has those cops open up the container that has the microwave emitter in it. And he's like,
Right.
"What the heck is this?" They just shoot him with a silencer like 3 times.
Ugh. And like the
We're
thing that's great about sort of like showing Origin again and really delving into it is that it's fun to see like the insane amount of preparation that has to go into being Batman. Like every second of this guy's life, he has to be setting something up to be used later.
Yeah, everything's in service of his mission. From finding this cave to putting the proper equipment in it to getting in contact with Lucius Fox and having him develop his gear.
Hmm.
Oh, and this moment here with the bats surrounding him,
Yeah, and the
goosebumps.
score. Yeah.
Um, and it really bothers me when people talk about like DC proper in the broader sense of just being generally darker than Marvel. I'm like, guys, before Nolan's movies, like that wasn't really true and still hasn't been true, at least. I mean, these movies have certainly influenced some of the comics, but I just mean that DC in the broader sense is not inherently darker than Marvel. Like you look at a show like, Batman Brave and the Bold, and that show is a lot more bright, and I mean that show is just about as bright and colorful as any Marvel movie. And Batman's a lot more like gung ho and like delivering justice, and like it's a more cheeky thing, and it's very much, he teams up with a random superhero and they punch some people at the end, like, and that show was still really great and is just as valid as any other. I mean, it doesn't have as much to say really. I'm not saying it's nearly as sophisticated as a Nolan movie, but I just mean that it's a valid interpretation, and like a lot of the comics have been like that. So I just don't understand, like, after we get this trilogy that everyone, like, it just feels like we got all these kind of, I mean, not to offend anybody, kind of false fans that just think every DC thing is these movies. And like, Zack Snyder certainly, pretended they were with Man of Steel and trying to make that as drab and dreary as it was, even going to the point of washing out the color of Superman's suit, which on set actually looks as colorful as it should. And it was
Yeah.
so weird. And like, so that's a thing that I don't like, that these movies have kind of left this weird imprint of DC is darker than Marvel. It's like that's just not true. Like
I
they
think it's
can be.
I think it's like a matter of what gets popular and what ends up being talked about in the mainstream. So a lot of that is obviously the movies, and like Batman the Brave and the Bold. Like we watched it and enjoyed it. We have a lot of people that we know who were big fans of it, but that show didn't/doesn't get talked about a lot. In part because I know some people were put off by it not being as dark and grounded as something like the 90s series. And when actual comics managed to sort of like get enough attention to be talked about, however briefly, in the mainstream, and this is for either DC or Marvel, it's something like Flashpoint or like Nick Spencer on Captain America, where there are some darker story points. And so I think it really is just kind of an unfortunate series of happenstances where the stuff that either looks darker or is darker from a story perspective just ends up being what gets talked about more. And so that creates this thing in people where it's like, oh, well, this is what everyone's talking about, then it must all be this way.
It's I think this movie has a very interesting take that is in total contrast with the animated series, in that Bruce was genuinely like he was Batman. Like even when he was Bruce Wayne, um, he has the playboy persona, but he genuinely thinks of himself like his true self as Batman. Like he even talks to Alfred in his Batman voice. Um, and here, like he puts on the playboy persona just so no one will suspect him as being who he is. But this is a Batman, at least in the back of his head, like especially when we get to the end of this movie, he wants to eventually put this suit down and have a life. Like he does long to have a relationship with Rachel. Um, Obviously, the mission comes first, but he's hoping at some point he can get crime down enough to justify putting this suit up.
Yeah. And like I think there is that thing that you hear someone on Geek Evolution mentioned it, which I think holds true of a lot of incarnations of Batman, including this one, which is that he has the Bruce Wayne persona, who the public sees. He has the Batman persona, which is what the criminals see, and then he has the actual like real guy underneath both of those, who Alfred and Rachel and Lucius get to talk to.
Yeah, this is a Batman who's wearing two different masks.
Hmm. He does a really good job though at the Bruce Wayne persona part. Like he's really good at selling himself as like this charming, sort of lecherous but totally clueless guy.
Yeah, he sells that great. The only thing I had seen him in prior to this is American Psycho,
Mm,
and there's kind of a lot of that there too. So I think that movie is probably a big part of why he gets cast.
yeah, that might be true. And this was after he tried to audition for Superman, right?
I'm not aware of him auditioning for Superman.
Yeah, I think I heard something at like it was maybe it wasn't Nolan, but someone at Warner Brothers got interested in Christian Bale because he'd wanted to be Superman either for a Superman thing they were working on or a Justice League thing they were working on. And they were like, that fell through, but we really like this Christian Bale guy. Let's let him be Batman.
And I can't even imagine. Like
Yeah.
he can definitely pull off like the curly like hair, like he's got the swabby hair and he's got the right build. And but after seeing the man play Batman three different times, I can't even picture it.
Yeah, honestly. And I like how
I
the
mean,
thing is already black and he's like, more black.
Well, at least we'll have spares. Oh man, that's a great joke. See, I mean, there's levity all over this movie.
Yeah.
This is a great little sub bit, like the commissioner having to work with corrupt cops that he knows are like pieces of, you know.
Yeah. It's like he's not even commissioner yet. He's
Yeah, yeah,
still
that's true.
he's still Sergeant Gordon. And like this guy just he looks so skeezy. Like I'm feeling what Gordon's feeling right now, which is just like, why do I have to be stuck with this guy?
But I think this grounded approach really it doesn't necessarily only work with characters like Batman, but it's definitely most suited to a character like Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like Daredevil, he's a character that supposedly could exist in the real world because he himself does not have any. Well, Daredevil has enhanced senses, but he himself is not a superpowered being. That makes any sense?
Yeah.
He can't actually do anything that a normal human could not do.
They'd have to
Um,
be like the most extremely dedicated of normal humans, but it is feasible.
yeah, and have the kind of trust fund of someone like Bruce Wayne, at least in Batman's case. Um,
Mm.
so I like that towards the end of this scene here, as we're about to see, like he jumps a gap and does not perfectly land it, and hurts himself.
Yep. He's like, do you have anything lighter?
Ugh. Yeah, you can just feel the hurt.
Ugh.
They could not have cast a better Lucius Fox. My God.
Yes. Morgan Freeman is so good. And like the way that he's immediately like so he's cluing into the fact that something is up, even in the earlier scene. You just like he's not fooled for a second.
Yeah, but he also is not, in the guy's business and doesn't really care, you know.
Yeah, he's like the less trouble there is for me, then the less questions I gotta ask. And like
And
with a
this guy,
lesser oh sorry, I was just gonna say with a lesser actor, this could really be kind of a forgettable role, but he's so good.
yeah, and he's unique. Like he doesn't feel like a Q stand-in,
Hmm.
and we often have that for a lot of action heroes who need like gadgets or weapons or like a tech guy.
I still
And
want
this
my own
this is
Tumblr.
a very yeah, this is a very interesting and unique Batmobile. I mean, we've done the kind of tank style over the years, um, but this specifically never really like we'd never seen a Batmobile like this prior, and I like that it's huge but also small enough to fit into a single lane of traffic.
Yeah. It's like it's not so big that it looks awkward, but it's big enough to be like imposing.
And as we'll see in some of the later chase scenes, Christopher Nolan uses miniatures in a few shots, and it
Mhm.
still looks absolutely stellar. Like I would imagine the chase scenes would kind of take you out if they had to replace any substantial bits with CG, but Nolan did the majority of this like practically with miniatures, which is
Yeah,
insane that he was able to pull it off given the kind of chases that they do in this movie. This is actually still my well, not my favorite on-screen Batsuit now that we've had BVS. That's actually my favorite and the one that I think looks most like straight out of the comics.
hmm
Um, but before we got that movie, the suit that he's wearing in this film was actually my favorite.
it's a really, really good suit.
And obviously, it has the same issue that a lot of the previous suits in that he can't turn his head. But I just like how simple and imposing this suit is.
Yeah, and like this bat symbol, I really like. It
Yeah,
might,
there's a simplicity and an elegance to it.
it might be my favorite symbol. I think so. Yeah, yeah, it is.
That's a great line.
Mm.
And I think a lot of the reason why people don't complain about, especially this first scene coming up, is that I mean, yes, it's an action scene, but it's also not. Or it's like it's more about the atmosphere and making Batman feel like a horror movie villain, at least for this one scene.
Yeah, because like again, you want to believe that this is a guy who shows up, and then criminals are like, "Oh no," and like poop their pants because of how terrified they are.
But it's
Yeah,
not a totally unvalid criticism that that scene is still not shot particularly well.
I suppose I could see where they're coming from.
But this is really a effective, moody, tension building kind of atmospheric.
He told you to get out. You should have gotten out.
Yeah, something's going on here. You better bail. And then he persists to the bar. I guess the Batman could still capture it, but I don't know.
I
Batman
guess.
could have followed him, taken out
I
the wheels
guess
of the car before he
just
stopped the
that
report.
confident or stupid.
That's funny.
That became
This
a
isn't
meme.
supposed to be, I don't think, but it's pretty funny.
I've seen that out of context enough times that it's funny to me. And so like this is also a thing that you could argue like we're getting too close up with the action, but this is again in service of not fully revealing him just yet.
And again, to Nolan's credit, this is something that I appreciate with him that I really don't with a director like Zack Snyder, where it's like it's more about the spectacle than it is about story.
Yeah, this is the other way around. And yep, it's like an hour and 3 minutes, almost exactly.
More levity, it just works. Nice
It's really
Cody.
charming.
Okay.
This is a really charming movie that's really funny in a lot of places. Do you think it's just that people don't go back to this one a lot?
Yeah, because a lot of people, I mean, apparently like you too, didn't even know this movie existed before they got to Dark Knight.
Mm.
And what's I think a lot like the darker tone and atmosphere is a lot of the reason why I probably didn't see any marketing for it as a kid. Because like I was a pretty stereotypical kid. Like I watched a lot of Cartoon Network, um, not so much Nickelodeon, just because I hated SpongeBob, and I don't think Avatar was on at that point. Yeah, I am one of the few kids that hated SpongeBob and kind of still does. But yeah, I don't remember seeing any marketing in this movie for this movie whatsoever as a kid. Maybe they didn't market it to kids. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, because there are a lot of moments here where like a young kid might get really freaked out or maybe make a scene and cry, and I mean like it's a fairly tame movie. Um,
True, but you
like
feel like
I think you
maybe
could take a kid to this, but like a young kid might freak out at certain moments because it is dark and there are a few horror movie esque scenes.
I also feel like maybe Nolan himself would have been insistent that it's not like kids are not the target audience.
And they're clearly not. Yeah. I mean, but once your kid's like a little older, like say 9 or 10, like I'd say they should be able to handle this.
Mm. True, but then again, we also have to remember that with this character, we've had returns where like parents complained that that movie was too dark. So even
Oh,
though
of
that
course,
is
you got Penguin biting off people's noses and other
yeah,
insanity.
like that's more of a gross sort of like mean movie than this is. But that might also have been a factor of like, okay, we've got another Batman thing that's skewing a little bit more adult. Let's not
I mean,
oversaturate
but at
the
the same
marketing.
time, like since that movie, we had so many more goofy movies that were definitely playing to kids. Like Schumacher's movies were essentially live action toy commercials. And
True,
that's
but
the
like,
last image of Batman that the general public has in their head before we get this film.
I mean, I'm coming at it from like the perspective of someone working on that marketing or like being at Warner Brothers and seeing this and being like, okay, we've got another more adult skewing Batman movie. Let's not make the mistake that we did with Returns and like market it as a kids thing because then we might get parents complaining again.
That's fair. And it's not like this movie bombed. Like I said, it was a sleeper hit,
Hmm.
but it is the unfortunate thing of it was a movie that like did just it just enough to justify making a sequel, but like no one remembers or talks about this movie pre Dark Knight.
Yeah.
It was so weird. Like even as a kid, like I watched reruns of this movie constantly on cable. Um, but like I would mention this movie to my friends, and like most of them hadn't even seen it or heard of it.
Hmm.
Totally baffling to me. And like, sure, like I don't know if I would have found myself watching this movie had it not conveniently been playing on cable all the time. But which is one of those things where this is a really, really quality comic book movie, and even my friends, like major nerds who consume almost nothing but this stuff, totally foreign to them, never seen it, never heard of it.
Yeah, that's more. This movie deserves better than that. It's unfortunate.
I also kind of think, and I mean, you can tell me if I'm a little off base here. The plots are really, I think, in again, you can ask me if I'm out base here, and I want to preface this by saying, especially since we did a commentary for it, I love The Amazing Spider-Man. It's a
Hmm.
deeply flawed movie, but I love it for a lot of reasons. I think justifiable, but I think this movie hurts that film. Um,
Elaborate.
I can see. because I can see the influence. Like we got like here the microwave emitter. It's going to disperse this toxin across the city. We've got the lizard doing essentially the same thing in Amazing Spider-Man. That movie also has a darker tone and darker color palette than any Spider-Man movie previous. Um, Spider-Man is only showing up at night or when it's really overcast.
Yeah,
I
those things
I
wouldn't have
There's
occurred to
definitely
me.
influence, at least because I don't see Mark Webb making those choices just freely. I see that as mandates from Sony because dark and gritty is the hot ticket. That's the trend that we got to capitalize on.
Yeah. And like it was like Sony was far from the only ones doing it. Like I want to say only a couple of years ago we'd really fully gotten out of the sort of wake of this movie in The Dark Knight. But yeah, those wouldn't have occurred to me, I don't think, but now that you brought it up, they are definitely there. And like again, this great persona that he's putting on, he's just like, I got these two chicks with me who want to hang out in the pool, so I'm gonna buy the whole hotel so that they can do that.
Yeah, he's really committing to the persona here. And then in this next moment here with Rachel, it comes back to bite him immediately. And I like the actions and consequences of that.
Hmm. And it's like it's this thing of even more so than other actions and consequences. He's trying his hardest to explain to her, but he knows that this kind of thing is stuff that he's going to have to keep doing. Like it's not like he gets caught by Rachel and then like is going to try and stop doing this. He has to keep doing stuff like this.
But he's trying to convince her that he's more than that. Um, and I think he's almost able to until the two not sorority chicks, but I don't know, the two Russian models or whoever they are call his name. They keep calling his name in the background as he's trying to explain to her that I like this isn't really me. Like I am more than this. And then he's got the two supermodels calling for him,
Yeah.
immediately undercutting what he just said. I do think like this movie kind of gets away with it, but the more and more I watch this movie, that feels like the script talking through a character. Um, but I like the through line and the callback that Bruce has later with that, and that's how he lets Rachel know that he is in fact Batman.
Yeah. And that also, like, in a more vague sort of philosophical sense, ties into the whole not killing, the whole just deciding that it's the League of Shadows methods are too much. Where it's like your motivations can be altruistic, and what you want and who you are underneath can be all sorts of like well meaning, but it's the consequences of your actions and the things that you decide to do and the path that you decide to take that is like your actual impact and how people are actually going to look at you.
Um, I remember very distinctly in the theater when I was 5 years old and I saw Spider Man for the first time, being really shocked and like my heart stopped and I jumped so hard when I saw Goblin just jump at the screen and they did that whole image shatter thing. I know for a fact I would have had that exact same reaction with the jump scare we get of Scarecrow here
Yeah.
if I had seen it in the theater. I really like the use of Scarecrow in this film.
Yeah. He's great.
And like this movie, much like the second movie, also understands pecking order. Something that a movie like Spider-Man 3 and ironically even the Amazing Spider-Man 2 kind of didn't understand. Where it's like the issue isn't having too many villains, I should say. Um, the issue is like you have one main, right? And your other is secondary, and he serves the story into the capacity that he needs to, but they're not here just for the sake of being here. They both serve the narrative, and there's a different measure of importance.
Yeah. And it's also like a note to this movie's structure of not having Roz through most of the middle chunk, so that what the Spider-Man movies do is that they'll have all of the villains like acting independently through the same stretch of the movie, so we constantly have to keep cutting between them, versus you have one set up and then you take him off the playing field for a bit so that the other guys can do their thing and then you bring him back in.
I really like this bit.
Yeah.
I've been wrong before, and like he has this like slight shadow of doubt, but even early on in their relationship, he knows that this guy's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. And like it's that bit of cynicism, like a little bit of skepticism of like, oh man, I really want to believe that there's someone else out there who just wants to do the right thing and wants to like stop all of this corruption. But he's in the Gotham PD. He knows like what might be like the negative consequences of believing in people like that.
I suppose this is a good place to ask. How do you feel about the
The
infamous
boy,
Batman voice?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's less pronounced in this movie than it is in the Dark Knight and Rises. I really don't mind it here. This scene is about as over the top as it gets, but like he's in like violent interrogation mode, so it makes sense. I really don't find it distracting in any of the movies, but the closest it gets to distracting is in the next two. I really don't have too much bad to say about it here.
Yeah, I don't either. Um, and I like that it's essentially just a different affect that he's putting on.
Hmm.
Um, they'll make it a modulator in um Ben Affleck's rendition of Batman, and it sounds awful. I can't like it sounds horrible. Like I mean, it's not as easily make funnable as it gets in you know the later two Nolan movies, but it just doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know what it is, but I really think the approach that the the Burton Schumacher movies and the '90s animated series had with it was the way to go, which is just like it really is just a different affect, and you kind of just have to trust that the audience won't question it. Like, no one really cares that he sounds like the same guy in and out of costume. If you get a guy with enough range and he can just, like, you want Batman to still sound like a human being. And like don't worry too much about, oh, but how do people not realize that he sounds just like Bruce Wayne? Just get a guy who can believably still sound like a person, and like he's not putting on a voice, he's just shifting the way that he speaks.
Especially because um, in the more heightened universe of the DCEU, we have a Batman that's dealing with superpowered beings and stuff, and it's like you don't need the same overbearing level of realism.
Yeah.
I really, really like this scene. This is decisively not an action scene. Like he takes out two people here, and then he goes to fight Scarecrow and is immediately overtaken. And this just, I mean, because we've seen Batman in his element already, winning. Um, we need to see him lose once to really get what the stakes are and like what he's up against.
Yeah. And it also, like, for the next time, it also allows us because our last scene with him was comparatively brief to like show
Yeah.
Scarecrow like doing what he does, like you need to lighten up, uh, being like taking advantage of fear again because that's his defining thing, and it's still something that Bruce is kind of struggling with himself. Like he's claimed his own fear by creating the bat costume, but he's not fully like past all fear himself, and so it's good to have Scarecrow like win against him for this one time.
And this, I always really liked this choice, because I mean, I'm not gonna say you don't see it a lot. Often, the traditional three act structure involving a hero, they'll lose at least once throughout their story, and then come back and win for the finale. But there was something, because I knew we were still like fairly deep into second act territory.
Mhm.
Um, so there was something really compelling about watching our hero kind of lose in the middle of his story here, and the whole thing of why do we fall,
Yeah.
so we can learn to pick ourselves up. I really like that through line.
Mm. And I like that as we're about to see here, Alfred told Lucius, like he pretty much that's that part of him that's like okay, past a certain point, you can't you've got to put your own well-being above maintaining the charade, and so Alfred made that decision for him.
And
And it's
it's
like,
clear that this is already a guy that he can trust. He's making jokes like this.
yeah, ouch. You're not supposed to get blackout drunk before your birthday, Bruce.
I like that. We didn't talk about this. Interestingly, this city, especially when we get um towards the later half of the movie, um, this Gotham, it's not 89 and it's not Joe Schumacher, but it is still, um, at least in the Narrows, a very heightened, stylized Gotham.
Yeah,
And then when we get to, Rises and, I mean, Dark Knight and then Rises, it's just Chicago. Like, we
yeah,
kind of do away with trying to make it look like this other city that doesn't actually exist.
yeah. It's kind of one of those places that you hope would never exist in this movie for just how bad it gets. But you're right. Once we get to the next two movies, the environment feels different. It feels more just like a place that you could go visit.
Which, on on one hand, is definitely commendable. Like, we are doubling down on the realism and making everything feel as grounded as possible. And again, like for people who are a lot more, not to dismiss anybody's taste, but I guess highbrow about these kind of movies, like not every superhero or comic book related thing needs to be this. Um, Again, it's really only suited to characters like Batman and Daredevil. But for characters who have powers or are aliens from other planets, uh, how much realism can you really indulge trying to put in the movie
Yeah.
before it just feels kind of hackneyed, as it often does with Zack Snyder's movies?
Yeah. You get the sense that like Nolan and everyone working on this movie knew what would be satisfying to pre-existing fans of the material and wanted to do the parts that they were adapting justice, but weren't like overly fixated on like fan service.
And like we don't see anything like a Lazarus pit in this movie. But it's interesting because once I found out more about Batman, delving a little bit more into the comics and stuff, while they did take a more grounded approach, there's nothing in this movie that necessarily precludes villains like um, Mr. Freeze or a more traditional like jacked up super serum Bane or things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so just coming out of this first movie before we got Dark Knight, I always assumed that we could eventually go more supernatural if they wanted to eventually take it in that direction.
Yeah, like there's really nothing that would stop that possibility apart from just that's clearly not the kind of material that Nolan wants to tackle.
And to his credit, he did a phenomenal job with these first two movies.
Hmm.
Um, Nolan, pretty famously, was not really interested in making Rises. He made Rises so that he would be allowed to make Inception with the budget and freedom that he wanted.
Yeah, which I mean,
Especially after the whole Heath Ledger situation, um, he was not too keen on doing a third movie.
yeah, like that's a situation that a lot of directors find themselves in now. One for them, one for me. And like, say what we will about Rises, and I'm sure when we eventually get to that, we'll have a lot to say about it. It really does feel like he tried to make that movie the best that he could have.
Yeah, I mean, even though at least from the outset his heart wasn't necessarily in it, um, it still feels like a movie that was made with a lot of um, passion and care and attention to detail. At least in how it was made. Like it's visually and just like the stuff that goes on in that movie, it's a very impressive and well made movie.
Yeah, oh, the Batman.
He gives a really cool, like kind of understated but still kind of manic performance here.
Yeah, he's great. I love him.
Um, and what's really kind of fun about this scene is, at least like knowing this movie as well as I do at this point, after we get like like both this and the climax of the movie, I'll take place over the course of one night. Like we get Rachel to the cave after this whole like throwdown and then chase scene across the city in the Batmobile. And then Bruce immediately has to go to a party to entertain some guests for his big birthday bash. And then he's fighting Roz, and then his house is burning down, and he has to go suit up as Batman and go try to stop Roz.
Yeah,
And like it doesn't at all feel rushed, but it is really cool that like we're so, in a sense, we're so close to climax and it doesn't even feel like that.
Yeah, no, it's big. We've still got like a good,
We still got a lot of story to tell.
yeah. And like I always admire movies that can do that, that can make you forget or like not even realize just how short the time span is.
This is really freaky. I like it.
It's so gross.
He's like using this black tar.
Please leave a
Then he
message
just
after
knocks him
the
out.
beep.
Oh, that's great. I also like that we incorporate the bats into a scene, like
Yes,
outside of just being in the cave.
that's great.
That is really great. Yeah. Like it's I mean it's just fun to play with the bats as a motif because not only is that Batman's whole like thing, but it's also the very first shot we get. It's how we open the movie. Bats.
It's just such a cool, like, visual and a cool idea.
Uh, let me ask you this. You say you haven't gone back to this movie a bunch. Um, you have gone back to Dark Knight considerably, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious because with movies like this that I like and have seen a number of times, I'll go back and watch with friends and family who either haven't seen it in a long time or have never seen it at all. And it's always fun to watch a movie like this that you love and see somebody with kind of like a fresh set of eyes, and see what they come away from it with. So have you ever done that with this movie, or would you be inclined to do that with this movie? Because I definitely plan on doing that with my friends when we go out to see it again.
I would actually be inclined to do that because I think I'm the only one in the family who's seen this thing the whole way through. I'm pretty sure all of my viewings of this have been me by myself, which is odd because whenever like the Dark Knight happens to be on, we're usually all watching it together. It's like, yeah, this is definitely something that I would show people who haven't seen it yet, just to like watch it with them.
Especially because, like as I said before, it makes a good case for origin. Um,
Yeah.
like you go in with an open mind, and I think the average person would still find themselves pretty invested before we ever even get that suit on.
Mhm. And like that speaks to a lot of confidence that Nolan has in himself and his own storytelling, like well placed confidence. There's bats everywhere.
And insanely atmospheric and impressive score to go along with it.
Hmm. It's
And
just so cool.
it is super cool. And this, more so than Dark Knight, I think has a score that's more listenable outside of the film.
You
Not
know,
that it's
I'd agree with that.
yeah, because for a lot of Dark Knight, Joker's theme is just like this eerie noise.
Hmm. Excuse me.
I mean, again, like, do we really need to point out all the times that these movies actually have levity? I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, it's just it really struck me. It's like no one talks about it, but it's all throughout this movie.
Yep, this is a movie I would love to just go through and rewatch with friends and family that haven't seen it because there's something really cathartic about that for me. Like I've seen The Boys, season one in its entirety, 5 times already.
Whoa.
Um, yeah, twice by myself, and the other times were with a different set of friends who had all been seeing it for the first time.
Mm. And this chase is perhaps a bit indulgent, but really, really, really cool.
And like super masterful, one of the best chase scenes I've ever seen in a comic book thing. Like, not only do they do a solid job of giving us geography, but like pretty much everything's done in camera or with miniatures.
Yeah.
Can you? It is insane to me that there's not a single shot of the Batmobile throughout this whole sequence at CG. Not one. There's miniatures, but there's not one single shot where they rely on CG.
Yeah, and like that kind of commitment is why Nolan is Nolan. So that said, like we're gonna get to a bit in a minute here, where Bruce is so lucky that he did not get anyone killed during this chase.
And I was just about to mention that, because it's definitely a far cry from obviously what we saw in BVS with him just clear cut, straight up murdering criminals.
Yeah,
But in this sequence, we eventually get to a point where, okay, these cops have a genuine chance at stopping him, and he has to get Rachel, or at least slowing him down, and he has to get Rachel to the cave in a finite amount of time, or she is dead. And so you buy him risking these lives to save Rachel's. Um, like when you stop cars like this with bombs and things, there's no way in hell you can be sure that the cops all survive that and none of them get killed.
yeah. It's the stuff with
That is
the
a
bomb.
massive risk you're taking.
Yeah, it's the stuff with the bomb that like really threw me. And I was like, oh, that's a little bit much, my guy. I don't know if you had to do all that.
I mean, it's not straight. I mean, I would argue that they are kind of gating on him. Like they have him surrounded here for a second, and it's
Mm,
like he needs these cops off his tail so he can take care of Rachel. So
yeah.
I buy this. This is fine. Like as long as these cops are they have their seatbelts on it. Okay, they could definitely still die,
Yeah,
but
it's a little bit extreme.
but they have a shot at surviving that with you know I mean like they may be messed up and in the hospital for a while, but those crashes are nasty but not too bad to where I don't buy that they could all survive.
Yeah. It's the closest this movie gets to putting the spectacle ahead of the story. It's not quite there, but it's the closest we get to that line.
Yeah, and like I said, he needs these cops off his tail, so I get it. In BVS, like there's no need to just be murdering all these criminals.
Yeah, we don't. You know what we don't have him do? We don't have him smash a car and then attach a grappling hook to it to drag it behind him so that he can smash it into another car.
Yeah, I want someone to make a review of that movie, and then when he does that, put Miley Cyrus in like a wrecking ball in the background.
You have to decide what's worse, the song or the scene. And meanwhile, Rachel is just like having a panic attack this whole time. It's like she took really bad Quaaludes.
No way. Okay, never mind. Never
What?
mind.
What? What did you
I okay, so that actor, I thought he was for a split second, I thought he was Job from Banshee, which you haven't seen yet. But I was just
Mm.
like, how the heck have I seen this movie over 100 times and not noticed that was Joe from Banshee? And that's because it wasn't him. Okay, all right. He's a fan favorite hacker character in that show. I'm sure you will like him.
Yeah, okay.
And he's really reserved, back to talking like Bruce because it's Rachel.
Mhm.
And like he's not like outright revealing his identity here, but you tell that he's more relaxed with her because she's a love interest. Like he really likes her, cares about her, and he can be vulnerable with her in a way he can't with anybody else aside from Lucius and Alfred.
Yeah. And props on her for being able to effectively remember all of this information despite only being conscious for like a couple minutes.
It's really not that much. It's take one for yourself, give the other to Gordon. Trust no one.
And he immediately just has to go to a party. Like non-stop this guy's day is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're about to roll right into our third act here, and
Mhm.
there's something really cool about that. Like we have a large portion of the second act that just bleeds right into the third on the same night.
Yeah. There's like no real hard like line between them at all.
Yeah, like Bruce doesn't really even get a chance to breathe. I mean, this party is kind of his chance to breathe until he realizes Ra's al Ghul is there.
Yeah, like he walks in and almost immediately he's like, "Who's here? Say that again?"
This is really kind of tragic, like because Alfred really cares about Bruce's family and their legacy, and he's like, "It's all that's left of him, Bruce. Don't destroy it." And then he's
Yeah.
immediately gonna have to do that when he finds out Roz is here.
He doesn't want to, but almost instantly he has no choice.
Yeah, because like, how is everyone gonna react when he's like, "Hey guys, a terrorist is here"? Don't ask me how I know that, but a terrorist is here. You gotta leave. Get the hell out. Run.
Yeah.
Why am I associating with a terrorist? Don't ask questions. Run. Like that's kind of his only play is to be like the schmarmy, entitled douchebag rich guy.
Yeah.
This is so not a good look. You gotta wonder if he's okay. Never mind. I was gonna say
What?
at first, like, you gotta wonder if he's just faking being as cuckoo as he is, because later in the third act, when he's escaped and on the horse, he's clearly lucid and taking, pleasure in, scaring people. So it's like,
Yeah.
did he have?
It's like he's going in and out.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. The voice of God has never been more interesting. That's got to be one of the biggest ego boosts, right? It's like people associate your voice with what God may or may not sound like.
Hey, Bruce, let me introduce you to my old friend.
Ra's al Ghul. You know one of the things I hate about Ra's al Ghul and Arrow?
What?
They keep going in and out of the comic pronunciation for his name versus the Nolan pronunciation of his name. In the
Yeah,
comics, it's Raish, and
that's
in these
bad.
movies, it's Raz. And they keep going back and forth. Freaking pick one. That drives me insane. Like, also, season 3 in general of that show is where that series just collapses in on itself and becomes like a parody of itself, and it's just really awful, and it kind of stays that way until the very end of the show. It just gets worse and worse. Um, but yeah, I can't stand that. Like, if you don't want to do the comic book pronunciation, that's fine, but just pick one. This movie
Yeah,
picks one.
you can tell they're trying to please both like sides because these movies got big enough that people adopted their pronunciation. But like, no, commit, otherwise you look silly.
Like even in the Arkham games, we commit to Raish.
Hmm. Like,
So this is the other.
I like how quickly he comes into this. Like he sees that Roz is there, and like he wastes no time. He immediately starts acting all drunk.
Yeah.
He doesn't even
But
have to
this
think
speaks
about it.
to. Well, I mean, I think he's definitely putting thought into this, but this speaks to one of my major issues with this movie. Um, and how the second movie doesn't build on this when it should. Um, because of Bruce saying what he doing what he does here to get them all to leave, and then later with his house getting burned down and a major news organization writing an article about how drunken billionaire burns down his own house. Um, this is he's not he's kind of tarnished his reputation at this point, and he shouldn't. People should not be taking him seriously going into the next movie. And like he's running a charity or like I forget what you call it a fundraiser for Harvey Dent's campaign or whatever, and it's like people people would not still have respect for this guy after he kicked them out of his own birthday party the way he did, and then he was all drunk and he burned down his house. At least that's the story everyone has.
Yeah, like you get the feeling just based on some things that we've seen celebrities do in real life that like normal people on the ground wouldn't care so much. Like their opinion of him wouldn't be all that changed just because he's rich and drunk, whatever, they do crazy stuff. But like the people, because you imagine that most, if not all, of the upper class like were at this party. So he really should be ostracized from them at least, and we don't speak to that at all.
We really don't, and he's still associating in the same circles when we get to the next movie.
Yeah. But do you think they were all like, he was going through something? Yeah, he was
Well,
having a
they don't.
bad.
They have no indication of what that something was. Um, as far as they know, he's just a drunk, spoiled douchebag who burned down his own house.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that we kind of, because I understand that the Dark Knight already is so full of stuff that on top of everything else would be. I can
I
see
mean,
just
because
not.
you have to fundamentally change certain sections of the movie, and I get that. Um, but at the same time, though, like it's great that Dark Knight stands on its own so well, considering a lot of people didn't even see this movie. But at the same time, it is a sequel to this.
Yeah,
Like you don't get to pretend certain events in your previous story just didn't happen.
and I will say that I think that the story, like the ideas that do get carried over into that movie, maybe don't get enough credit. To where, in a lot of ways, what Roz is talking about in this scene is kind of a prelude to the Joker's own philosophy, where he says around here, like, create enough hunger and everyone becomes a criminal. It's like there is this kind of connection to what Roz believes and what the Joker believes, insofar as, yeah, like he just
If you
said, like,
push someone far enough, they'll eventually break.
Yeah, and like everyone is like that. They have this belief that everyone deep down is just waiting for that moment to break. And so, like, it's up to them to sort of show people their own faces. And in Raza's case, control them where necessary.
This is just one of many great, like, half a dozen setups
Ooh,
and payoffs.
yeah,
Mind your surroundings. Yeah, there's a style to the Narrows that definitely feels heightened. Um,
yeah,
and like, not necessarily to the detriment, because I mean these movies on the whole are going for a more grounded style, but we definitely do lose um that heightened quality when we get into the next two movies.
mm,
It really feels like Gotham City is just Chicago.
yeah. Jeez.
Yeah.
I love this song coming up where it's like, all those push ups, you could at least be able to lift a lot off yourself.
Okay, yeah. I'm you know what? I'm done. I'm done harping on these movies having way more levity than people pretend like they do. Like it's this is just great. And
It's
like you
going to
can
keep
have
that.
like it's okay to have this in a dark story.
Yeah. And like the reason that I think we bring it up so much is just because it really strikes you as you're watching the movie how much that's not reflected in like its reputation and the way people talk about it, and it feels so like undeserved that that gets forgotten so much. It really is just weird because like we've spoken to this a couple of times now over the course of this movie, just the way that people perceive either one movie or a whole franchise of movies versus when you actually sit down with it and what actually happens. And it happens not just with these movies, but almost with any franchise. The way that people's memories kind of can contradict what is actually on the screen is very interesting.
Oh, I freaking love this callback, man. It hits me every time.
It's so good. And like he gets so genuinely like touched. It's great.
Because Bruce is at his lowest low at that point, and he needs somebody to help him get up. Because, like, I mean, it's not just the fact that he tarnished his family's reputation. His uh, his family's house is now being burned down, and the guy who trained him is on his way to wreck the entire city.
Mm.
And while I like that Batman doesn't have sidekicks in these movies, I appreciate that we just don't entertain the idea that he can somehow do all of this by himself. Like, he needs Lucius, he needs Alfred, he needs Gordon. Like, despite, all the training and the money in the world, he cannot physically do this alone.
Yeah.
And I this is definitely a hot take for a lot of Batman fans who come from more of the comic background, but I'm not a huge fan of the Bat family. Um, especially when they involve um, Jason Todd, like as Red Hood. after he's already murdered a bunch of people and persists to use guns, he just conveniently switches them out with rubber bullets whenever a writer thinks maybe we should, talk about that.
Mhm.
Um, I don't love Batman with sidekicks. Not in love with it. Um, I like that Robin eventually branches off, gets his own team, eventually becomes Nightwing. I like all that stuff, but I don't like that we keep giving Batman a Robin. Um, and I also it strikes me as kind of odd and irresponsible that he keeps enlisting kids in his war on crime.
Mm. Note to self,
So,
I can now never let Eden listen to this commentary because she will come after you.
okay, great. Yeah, don't. Yeah, please don't. I don't need that. Oh
She
man.
loves the Bat family dynamic so much, especially Jason. Jason is like her favorite. But yeah, now this is a really nice like heightening of the stakes, like making it so everyone's seeing like their fears everywhere, and like especially with people who are already kind of like loose cannons like Flash. You're there's a real sense of like things are about to get really, really, really bad if we don't fix this immediately. Like it's gonna be a freaking massacre. Now we've got this theme again. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's so iconic and has become just as um and like ubiquitous with the character as really any aspect, the whether it's the costume or um the Playboy thing, or like this score. Like you hear the score and you immediately think of Batman.
Yeah.
And this is just another example of what I was talking about, like Batman enlisting the help of Gordon here.
Mm.
Another really awkward thing about Amazing Spider-Man stealing this movie's third act is it makes a lot less sense for a character like the Lizard. Um, when I first heard Lizard was going to be, the villain for that movie, I thought, okay, we're going to give Dr. Connors, his family, we're going to really flesh him out, and the Lizard's kind of just going to be a insane, bloodthirsty monster that Spider-Man has to take down without too severely injuring or killing, because he knows the man behind that monster. Uh, but we went as far as to not only make him sentient, but make him just want to turn everyone else into monsters. And it's
Yeah.
just really awkward and clunky and goofy.
Like what works about this movie, like I just said, like this decision is the scale, and in Spider-Man having his plan be so grand in scale is really kind of out of place with the rest of that movie.
It really is. And like with this, it also plays into the theme of fear, literally spreading fear across the entire city.
Mm-hmm.
So
Whereas
it's
there,
embedded into the very DNA of this movie.
we're playing into the theme of spreading lizards.
Great callback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everyone else who's breathing in the theater toxin, don't worry too much about the giant bat that's flying over you. It's not a big deal, okay?
I'm just waiting for somebody to make a meme of Ra's al Ghul wearing this mask and it having something to
Yes,
do with
I
Corona.
was gonna say you beat me by 1 second. Ra's al Ghul is prepared for COVID. Are you?
Again, not great, but serviceable.
Yeah, like it's really not enough to take me out of it. Gordon throughout this whole sequence is great. He's just like, okay, I guess we're doing this now.
And I think, huh? Well, I mean, this is kind of an important distinction to make, right? I think this is my favorite Batman movie. Um, I will say I think Dark Knight is slightly better, ever so slightly.
I'm not someone who makes a distinction between better and favorite. And with that in mind, it's really hard for me to choose between the two. Like, I really, really think that they both, like, I have almost nothing negative to say about either of them. So it's really, you'd have to twist my arm. I don't know. And like, I'd imagine seeing this as like an adult who'd grown up with the other Batman movies, it must have been really good to have a Batman movie that was just this great after all of the other ones where they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but I don't think it's a controversial take to say that this is the first really great, solid, all the way through Batman movie,
Oh, absolutely.
or at
Like,
least
as
that isn't Mask of the
I mean,
Phantasm.
well, people love '89. At least for people who grew up with that, like a lot of them really love that movie. It's still heralded as great. I don't think that movie's particularly great.
It has its
And
great aspects.
I think that movie is. I mean, I'm not gonna say bad, but like I've always felt super ambivalent about it. Like I can't bring myself to feel damn near anything watching it, and like it's weird because I'm not even necessarily bored, but I can't muster any like real feeling watching that movie.
I
It's
think that movie is very, very style over substance,
yeah,
and with returns like
even
Burton.
more so.
Yeah, and it's a different style from Burton to where his style just overwhelms it completely and makes it kind of hard to sit through. The Schumacher movies are like if you're into that sort of thing, they're very fun, like goofy romps. But this is the first one that's just like from beginning to end, it's just a really
Genuinely great, tells a good story with compelling
yeah,
characters.
well paced, doesn't feel like it's indulging too much in any places.
Yeah, and because of the really like the really like just bare not bare bones, just like tangible and physical approach to the filmmaking, there's a timeless quality to it. Like we don't really rely on CG aside from just backgrounds and maybe some city stuff. For the most part, everything here is done pretty practically. Everything, at least everything that can be done practically, is done practically.
Mm.
So there's a timeless feel to this movie. Like it doesn't feel. This is one of those movies from the early 2000s that does not at all feel dated.
Yeah.
This isn't a movie you really have to put yourself back in the time period to go back to.
Yeah, no,
A
not at
lot of
all.
people have that with things like Matrix and Blade, and to a degree that like that's understandable because those movies are very 90s. Um, but there's a timeless feel to this.
Yeah, and it's especially impressive because stuff like Matrix and stuff like Blade, in part you have to do that because of the level of influence that they had. And like you have to give yourself the historical perspective of, okay, I may have seen these tropes and like these visuals and like these ideas done elsewhere, but that's because these movies popularized them. This movie and The Dark Knight, despite how many movies like tried to ape off them and the sort of trend that they created, you really don't have to, like you said, you don't have to put yourself in that historical context to appreciate these. They work just fine, even without the sort of like the things that they helped codify and make into big trends. They're just good stories. Like they're just really, really solid movies to sit down and watch in a vacuum.
The first two, anyway.
Yeah, Rises.